Hi everyone. Today I will be presenting about my mom's first trip to, first trip ever actually to Guatemala. And so I decided to call it Natasha First Immersion because I believe it was something very important for her as a person, and I think that's also an event that built her up as a woman, and especially because she did that in the 80s, and I believe for a woman in the 80s to go alone in a country, nobody, it's Guatemala at that time wasn't a country people hear a lot about, so it was a bit like. Um, it was an immersion for her to go in a country where she didn't knew a lot about. Um, so that's why I also find this story very interesting. And like I was saying, especially for a woman in the 80s, I think it's very independent, a very independent thing to do. So let me start with my PowerPoint with the first slide. It was not long after Natasha's 27th birthday, and the winter was arriving. The time was getting cold outside, but for Natasha, it was the beginning of a thrilling adventure. She had been saving for months to have enough to accomplish one of her biggest dreams at the time. The car, smoothly turning the unusually curvy roads of the forest, was making its way to Montreal. In the car was Natasha and her mom. Natasha, still sleepy, was looking through the window, saying goodbye to her childhood place that she wouldn't be able to see before a long time. Her mom, eating a snack she had made before leaving the house, was driving using one hand. The other was for the sandwich. Ellen was used to the usual roads because she did it every morning to get to the nearby city where she worked as a teacher. Slowly speeding up on the road leading to the highway, Ellen took the fastest road leading to Montreal, and after driving for over 2 hours, she finally passed a bridge, leading to the city of Montreal, one of the biggest city in the province of Quebec. Natasha woke up as the sun was rising and starting to hit on her face. The car was at the same time passing a small bridge leading to the airport, and she could finally see the tip of the tail of her first airplane appearing. An hour later, she was saying the last goodbye to her mom and left to pass the security and get to her boarding emplacement. Finally inside, sitting in her seat, Natasha could feel butterfly in her stomach. She had made so many sacrifices and worked so hard just for this trip and was finally about to leave. And half of a day later, she finally arrived in Guatemala. At her arrival, she was already expecting things to be different, but she still had a cultural shock because Natasha was not speaking any Spanish and she only knew the base of English. But smart of her, she had already planned to follow a class of Spanish at her arrival, and somebody would be waiting for her at the airport. San Diego, her Spanish teacher, was the one waiting for her at the airport and brought her in her host family, where she would live for her first 2 weeks. When she finally arrived at her host family, she was very warmly welcomed by a man, his wife, and their 2 children. An enormous dinner was also waiting for them at the table. Their first dinner in her host family lasted for over 4 hours, and Natasha could only communicate by using her hands. But the children were so intrigued and interested in their new host that they ended up being a big help to translate her sayings to their parents. Natasha still had her own room in the house, but was leaving early every morning to get to her Spanish classes, where she made good friend with a Swiss nurse. Every time she used to go out with her friends she made, the parents hosting her worried about her safety. but Nasha will always reassure them by saying she was with friends. Her first night out was a unique experience itself, because she realized no matter where she will go, there will always be nice and caring people. She had first met the two parents who will be really kind to her, and now she had made friends she will remember forever. After passing her first 2 weeks in a host family, she decided to rent an apartment with her friend, where she stayed for a month and ended up fully learning Spanish due to being in a total immersion of the language. It was also Natasha's first Christmas without her family, and for her, the first time, sorry, but she felt like it was an amazing experience to pass it in another country because it was so different. People were celebrating in the streets and they danced. But Natasha didn't want it to stop her trip to only one city. And so she started doing trips around the country, which was still full of small villages at the time and had a lot of natural sight to visit. Wherever the place she had visited, she saw things she had never seen before, like women carrying wood to their house for cooking in small villages. At the opposite, most of the house in Canada sorry, had already electricity. She had made so many friends all around and used to go back to see them from times to times to their city or villages while she was still in Guatemala. After a certain time in her trip, Natasha reached a point in her where she even started to feel herself change and gain maturity, which was also a turning point for her in her trip, because she had been not only working to achieve her dream after beating a cancer at only 25 years old, but also gaining self-confidence by proving herself she could do anything and had the feeling of liberty. She knew something for sure at that time, and it was that money will not get her more happiness, but that by having meeting new people and having goals that you could accomplish, that they were enough to bring her happiness. After 3 months of traveling, Natasha's trip was finally coming to an end, and she had to say a last goodbye to Guatemala that had changed her in so many different ways. Driving back to the airport was full of emotions for her, but also of a feeling of self-accomplishment and happiness from all the things she had learned. Back in Montreal, her mom and stepfather were both waiting for her, arms open, and they both cried, meeting up again after such a long time. And they talked all their way back to the house, and Natasha impressed all of her family with her newly learned Spanish skills and her amazing stories about Christmas and all the friends she had made while being in Guatemala. So, thank you for listening to my story. Um, I know I was not presenting the slides because I wanted to keep the beat in my story. So now I will just give you a small presentation of my PowerPoint. So the first picture we can see is a picture of the Guatemala in the 80s. And so I think it's a bit different from what it was over here, mainly due to the fact that it was all in a Spanish country, and it was not as developed as Canada was at the time. The second PowerPoint slide that I made was the countryside, because when Natasha visited the country, she saw some women carrying wood on their heads, and it's not a thing that you could, I believe, you could see in Canada. No matter where you go, I don't think people will actually do that because they don't need to. They have electricity. The next slide was a holiday in Guatemala. So this is a picture of children's and also people celebrating Christmas in Guatemala. And so what I found interesting about this picture is that I felt like the color were very different from what we used to see over here in like the North America. So because over here there's a lot of blue and you know, you got some blue because of snowflakes, you got blue because of the, you know, the snowball, the snow we have, but for them they have a lot of red, you know, a lot of green and yellow, and you see all types of different color that we will not see over here in Canada, I believe, during Christmas. So I found that was a bit interesting to see the difference between the two culture and the shock that the cultural shock that Natasha lived when she passed her first Christmas in Guatemala. And so my last slide is the rise of Natasha, because I believe this picture is very powerful because it represents all the challenge she had to face going in Guatemala in the 80s. So not speaking Spanish, not speaking any English, you know, talking with her hands. She, you know, she didn't had a lot of money either when she did her trip. So I think for women in the 80s, it's a very impressive thing to do, and it shows a lot of self, you know, not only self-esteem, but goals. Someone who have goals and want to accomplish itself, and so himself. Sorry, and I believe that it was an important thing to also underline in the stories that my mom beat a cancer at 25 years old, and after beating the cancer, she actually decided to go and make her first trip, plan her first trip. And so I think that's an amazing story because yeah, it's just an amazing thing to do. So thank you for listening to me, and I hope you like my presentation.